Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Always excited to explore these fascinating topics.
Today, we're going to get into something I think we can all relate to, the psychology of money.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and to guide us on this little journey, we're going to be using Claudia Hammond's book, Mind Over Money.
Yeah, a classic.
Right. So we're going to uncover some of the hidden forces that shape how we think about, how we interact with money, from childhood piggy banks all the way to adulting and beyond.
It really is amazing how much our psychology influences our financial decisions.
Crazy, right? Like we think we're being logical.
Totally.
But, come on, there's a whole world of subconscious stuff going on.
Absolutely.
So right out of the gate, Hammond throws out this wild idea. Money can actually act like a drug on the brain.
It's not just a metaphor, there's actual neuroscience to back it up.
No way, really.
Yep. The book talks about how money triggers this release of dopamine.
Oh, a feel-good chemical.
Exactly that feel-good chemical. And it's the same reward pathway that's activated by things like, chocolate or even addictive substances.
So that's why we get that little rush
Exactly.
when we see a big number in our bank account or we hear that cash register cha-ching. But here's where things get really interesting. Hammond describes this study where people watched videos of money being destroyed. Some videos showed real money getting torn up. Others showed fake money.
I wonder.
Right. So what do you think happened?
Well, people probably didn't care about the fake money.
You got it. But get this, people felt actual distress when the real money was destroyed.
Even though it was unusable.
Yep. Totally unusable. It wasn't about the physical piece of paper. It was about its potential, like its function as a tool.
Ah, so it's almost like an instinctual reaction, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, don't destroy that. It has value.
It makes you wonder, though, how do we even develop this understanding of money as a tool?
Well, Hammond takes us way back to childhood and explores how those early experiences, shape our relationship with money.
Oh, okay.
Things like allowances,
Yeah.
piggy banks.
Yeah.
Even just playing pretend store with friends can have a surprisingly lasting impact.
Oh, I remember my parents giving me a small allowance for chores. It was my first taste of financial independence, even if it was just a few dollars.
Right, and it teaches you that connection between work and reward.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
But there's this one study in the book that really blew my mind. Researchers set up this play economy with kids
A play economy, that's
Well,
interesting.
where they could earn tokens
Yeah.
and then spend them on different activities, or they could save up for this super cool toy at the end. You'd think they'd all go for the big prize, right?
That's what I do.
Me too.
Mhm.
But very few kids could resist the temptation of spending those tokens right away.
Oh, wow.
It's that desire for immediate gratification.
Yeah. So powerful, even at a young age.
And it's like those classic marshmallow experiments. Remember those?
Yeah. Yeah, where the kids have to choose between one marshmallow now or two later.
Exactly. But in this case, it's about learning to delay that gratification when it comes to spending.
And those early patterns, they can really carry over into adulthood.
It's crazy to think about how those childhood experiences might still be like secretly influencing our financial habits.
Right. It's all connected.
It is. So, okay, let's say we've learned a bit about money as kids.
Okay.
Now we're adults,
Uh-huh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
How do our brains deal with making spending decisions?
Right.
Hammond gets into this thing called mental accounting, which is basically how we categorize money for different purposes in our minds.
Interesting.
So even though technically every dollar is the same,
Right.
we tend to treat money differently depending on where it came from or what we plan to use it for.
Right. Makes sense.
So the book has this perfect example. Imagine you're at home, and you're thinking about buying a $20 bottle of gin.
Okay, yeah.
You wouldn't hesitate.
Right.
But then you're on vacation, you're at a fancy bar, there's a breathtaking view,
Uh-huh.
and you happily shell out $10 for a single gin and tonic. Same gin,
Maybe even less of it.
less. But we perceive the value totally differently because of the context.
Oh, I see, because of where we are.
Exactly. We've got these mental accounts for vacation money, fun money, essential money, and we spend accordingly.
So it's all about the mental framing, really.
Totally. And it's not just about vacations, right?
Right.
It's like when those airlines add baggage fees after you've already mentally committed to the ticket price.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly that extra $50 feels like this massive loss because it wasn't part of the original mental account.
It's like our brains are playing tricks on us.
They are. And these tricks, they can be pretty powerful. And this kind of brings us to another big psychological bias, loss aversion.
Ah, yes, loss aversion. The idea that the pain of losing money feels way stronger than the pleasure of doing the same amount.
Oh, tell me about it.
The book actually talks about this classic thought experiment where you imagine, losing $100 and then finding $100.
Okay.
Logically, they should just cancel each other out, right?
Makes sense.
But that pain of the loss tends to just feel much more intense.
It explains why I, cling to things I don't even need.
Uh-huh.
Or I avoid selling investments, even when it might actually be beneficial.
Yeah, that fear of loss can be pretty paralyzing.
It is. But how can we use this knowledge to actually make better choices?
That's a great question, and it's definitely something we're going to explore further. But first, let's shift gears a bit and talk about perception. This is a big one. Perception and money.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Perception. How does that tie into our financial choices?
Well, Hammond highlights this really cool study that looked at how we perceive the size of coins.
Okay.
And it turns out we tend to underestimate the size of coins, especially the more valuable ones.
Wait, are you telling me we actually see a quarter as smaller than a nickel, even though they're pretty much the same size?
You got it. It's called the accordion effect.
No way.
Our brains are tricky. They're making those valuable coins seem physically smaller, maybe to make us less hesitant to spend them.
Well, that's so sneaky.
Yeah.
It's like our subconscious is trying to sabotage our savings goals.
Maybe just a little.
But what about foreign currencies?
Oh, good point.
When we're traveling and stuff.
Right. Think about a time when you've traveled abroad. Those unfamiliar bills and coins can make it so hard to judge the actual value of things.
Oh, tell me about it. I went to Europe once, and I ended up spending way too much because I just didn't understand the exchange rates.
It's a super common experience. Our brains struggle to evaluate prices in those unfamiliar currencies.
Which leads to all those impulse purchases and budget blowouts.
Exactly.
So being aware of these perception biases can help us make better decisions, especially when we're traveling or dealing with large sums of money.
Precisely. It's all about understanding those little mental shortcuts our brains take.
And learning to override them.
Yes. When necessary, of course.
This is fascinating stuff. It's like we're getting a crash course in financial psychology.
Right. It's so interesting.
But now I'm wondering, if our brains are so easily swayed by these biases and mental tricks, is there anything we can actually do to, regain control?
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely hope. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about next. We'll dive into strategies for outsmarting these biases, making smarter saving decisions, and finding true value in our spending choices. So we've seen that our brains aren't always the best at making rational financial decisions.
Definitely not always.
But, awareness is a big step.
Right. So where do we go from here? How do we actually outsmart those sneaky biases?
One strategy is to harness the power of pre-commitment.
Go.
Hammond talks about these things called commitment savings accounts. The ones that kind of restrict your access to your funds.
Oh, like putting your savings on lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. Until a specific date or you reach a particular goal.
So you're less tempted to touch it for those impulse buys.
Exactly. It removes willpower from the equation. Oh, I like that.
And saving becomes more automatic.
Smart.
There's this fascinating example in the book. It's about a program in the Philippines.
Okay.
Where villagers could save money in, get this, a locked box.
A locked box.
Yeah. And the bank held the key.
It's like a super serious piggy bank.
Right. But by creating these little barriers, these commitments, we can actually trick our brains into making better choices.
I love that. So sometimes a little inconvenience is a good thing.
Definitely. And another important point Hammond makes is keeping things simple, especially with saving.
Oh, tell me about it. There are so many different accounts and investment strategies out there.
Right. Instead of juggling all that, focus on creating a system that's easy to understand and maintain.
Less mental energy spent on managing finances means more likely we'll stick with it.
Exactly. And it's not just about how we save, but what we spend our money on.
True.
The book highlights the idea that experiences tend to bring more lasting happiness than material possessions. Oh, I'm all about experiences. I'd much rather spend money on a weekend trip with friends.
Right.
Or a cooking class than on, a new pair of shoes or something.
Totally. It's about creating memories and enriching our lives, things that stuff just can't do.
Makes you wonder why we get so caught up in wanting to buy things all the time.
It's easy to get swept up in it.
It is. Speaking of which, the book also talks about sudden wealth.
Oh, interesting.
And how it doesn't always equal happiness, which kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, there's that famous example of the lottery winner who ended up worse off than before.
It's like you go from 0 to 60 without knowing how to drive.
Exactly. It's crucial to have a strong foundation, financially and emotionally.
To navigate those uncharted waters.
Right. And even if we're not expecting to win the lottery anytime soon,
Right.
there are still lessons to be learned there.
What do you mean?
It's about being mindful, focusing on the long term, building those healthy habits.
Instead of just chasing instant gratification.
Exactly. And, not trying to keep up with those Joneses.
Oh, the Joneses. Always keeping up.
It's about finding that contentment, that fulfillment in the things that truly matter.
All right, now let's get a bit more serious
Okay.
and delve into the psychology of poverty.
A crucial topic.
Yeah. How it impacts not just our financial decisions, but, our well-being as a whole.
Absolutely. And what's important to remember is that poverty isn't just about a lack of money.
So,
It's about this constant state of scarcity,
uh-huh.
a mental and emotional strain that can actually make it harder to make good choices.
The book mentions how financial stress can impair our cognitive abilities.
Right. So it's tougher to focus.
To solve problems.
It's like having limited mental bandwidth.
So if you're constantly worried about making ends meet,
It's really tough to think straight and plan for the future.
which explains why sometimes people make decisions that might seem, from the outside, a bit irrational.
It's not about being irresponsible. It's about that chronic stress.
It's a tough cycle to break.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But we have to ask ourselves, how can we support those experiencing hardship?
In a way that empowers, not creates dependency.
That's the key.
It's a complex issue.
For sure. And I think it starts with empathy.
Rather than judgment.
Exactly. And addressing those systemic factors, access to education, affordable housing, healthcare.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
Lighten the mood. Talk about some of the quirkier aspects of our relationship with money.
The fun stuff.
Hammond shares some really interesting studies that reveal those sometimes irrational but often amusing tendencies we have.
I love those.
Me too. Like the accordion effect we talked about earlier, how we see those coins as smaller than they are.
Our brains are playing tricks on us.
They really are. It's wild. Making those valuable coins seem less substantial, I guess.
It's a great example of how abstract concepts like value can influence our perception.
And it makes you wonder what other mental shortcuts are happening without us even realizing.
Right. There's this other study in the book with lemonade stands.
Lemonade stand.
Yeah. They changed the wording on the signs.
Okay, I'm listening.
One sign said, spend a little time to enjoy a glass of lemonade.
Okay.
The other said, spend a little money.
I see. So they were testing how people react to time versus money.
Exactly. And you know what? People were way more generous when the sign emphasized time.
Really?
Yeah. It's like framing it in terms of time made it less transactional.
More like a shared experience.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. It shows how just a slight change in language can affect our behavior, especially with spending.
And it makes you think about how choices are presented to us in ads, marketing, even our own thoughts.
So much of this is happening on a subconscious level.
Right. We don't even realize it.
So we've explored our childhood experiences, our adult habits, but what's the main takeaway here?
The key is that we're not always rational when it comes to money.
No, we are not.
Our emotions, our biases, our social influences, they play a much bigger role than we think.
So we shouldn't beat ourselves up over those impulse buys or, those little financial missteps.
Exactly. We're human. We've got our quirks.
And the more we understand them,
the better choices we can make.
choices that align with our values, our goals.
Absolutely.
Okay, before we move on, I'm curious about something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Debt.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room.
I've noticed some people seem more comfortable with debt than others.
Interesting observation.
Is there a psychological reason for that?
There are a few factors. Some people might have grown up around debt. It was normalized for them.
Okay.
Others might have a higher tolerance for risk or a really optimistic view of their future income.
It's like those mental accounts we talked about.
Exactly. Some view debt as good debt, a mortgage, a student loan.
Makes sense.
Others see it as a sign of failure, a threat.
Right.
And these perceptions can shape our borrowing habits.
So someone who sees credit card debt as, normal might be more likely to rack up a big balance.
Than someone who sees it as a slippery slope.
So understanding our own psychology around debt can help us make better choices.
Absolutely. It's about developing a healthy relationship with debt,
Using it as a tool when necessary.
but being mindful of the potential downsides.
This has been an eye-opening conversation.
It really has.
I'm already thinking about those little changes I can make.
That's great.
But before we wrap up, what's one final thought-provoking idea you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Financial well-being is not just about numbers. It's about mindset.
Mindset.
It's about understanding our own psychology,
Okay.
recognizing our biases, making choices that align with our values and aspirations.
Okay, so we covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Our brains play tricks on us.
Definitely.
Childhood experiences shape our habits.
Right.
But what can our listeners actually do with all this knowledge? What are some actionable steps?
Hammond really stresses simplicity, especially when it comes to saving.
Oh, simplicity. I like the sound of that.
Forget those crazy complicated schemes with a million different accounts. Sometimes the best approach is the most straightforward one.
It's so easy to get overwhelmed with all the financial advice out there.
Absolutely. She gives this example of those commitment savings accounts.
Oh, yeah, the ones we talked about earlier.
Right, where you can't touch the money until a certain date or goal.
It takes the temptation away.
Exactly. She even talks about this program in the Philippines
Okay.
where people could save money in these locked boxes and the bank held the key.
Like a grown-up piggy bank.
Exactly. It creates this psychological barrier to spending impulsively.
So a little inconvenience can actually be a good thing.
Sometimes, yeah. And, it's not just about how we save, but also what we choose to spend on.
Right. We were just talking about that.
Hammond really makes the point that experiences tend to bring us more lasting happiness than all that material stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to realize that.
It's about shifting that mindset from things to experiences.
Concerts, trips, classes, those are the things that create memories.
The things that really enrich our lives in a way that a new phone or a fancy outfit just can't.
Speaking of enriching our lives, does the book talk about, like, generosity and charitable giving?
It does. And there are some really interesting findings there.
Like what?
Well, we're more likely to give when we feel a personal connection.
The connection to the recipient or the cause?
Exactly. It's that human element that really matters.
So it's not just about donating money, it's about finding meaning in our giving.
Right. Feeling like we're making a real difference.
She talks about something called the tainted altruism effect, right?
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating one.
So we judge acts of giving more harshly when we think the giver is getting something out of it.
Like if there's some personal gain involved.
It's almost like we have this expectation that true altruism should be completely selfless.
It raises some interesting questions about the motives behind charitable giving.
It does make you think.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into mind over money, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing is to remember that understanding our own psychology is just as important as understanding, financial concepts.
Being aware of our biases, our emotions, all those mental shortcuts.
Exactly. It's like becoming the CEO of our own financial brains.
I love that analogy. So with a little self-awareness and a willingness to try new things, we can all make better choices. Choices that lead to financial well-being and, just overall happiness.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
This deep dive has been amazing. So many great insights from Mind Over Money. Remember, everyone, the way we think about money matters just as much as how we manage it. Thanks for joining us.